be seeing my slide deck. Speak up now if it's not working. So this is the Green Bay Power BI user group, and it's our first hybrid meeting and first time getting back in person. It feels like 2 years. So glad to have everybody here and excited to have some stuff to talk about. Appreciate it. What we're going to go through, rough agenda, is welcome everybody. Remind everybody that the meetup site is the main place to go and join the community and get updates on the events that we're doing and where people are going to be meeting next. If you want to point your phone at the QR code, you'll get right to the presentation links, so you can have all these links and everything for later. We went through introductions, where you're coming from, who you are, what you're interested in Power BI, so we're already good there. We'll talk about some news on the Power BI space and invite news commentary from the user group and some recommended resources that we've all found to be helpful. Share what you found to be helpful with the group as well. We've lined up some user shares, which are 15-ish minute presentations from our users in the group about something interesting or going on with Power BI. I know Dustin has one. I've got one I can walk through, and I don't have Josh on there, but Josh will be doing one. Then we might have time for a moderated discussion of questions, things that people can bring to the group. We'll have people bring that up and kind of control that as we talk on the hybrid. You might have to come up here to the microphone to ask your question and look into the camera. So that's the price you pay. Then we'll probably sign out, disconnect that, and then at the end, let each group, they can do networking online and encourage the camera use. They know I'm not there to nag them, but I'll be there in spirit. And then in here, I'll be encouraging the networking. So that's the plan. So we did our introductions already, and I stole Steve's previous, meme on that because that's extra funny. I like it. So news and recommended resources. I put up here that Microsoft is doing a great job for those that want to understand what's new with Power BI. Their blog is regularly updated. They give detailed information on what's new, spin-off articles on how to use what's new, even if it's in preview. So I can't do a lot more with good news other than say, look at that blog and check out some of the best stuff that's out there. An area that I'd like to advocate that came out recently was the idea that if you have Power BI and you have Power BI Premium, you can have people who don't have any Power BI licensing at all use Excel to connect to those data sets. That's apparently a new thing. It used to be that you'd need some kind of Power BI licensing to do it. They're trying to make this even more accessible. So if you have Power BI Premium data sets, people out there that have no Power BI licensing, free, pro, or otherwise, can still use Excel to talk to those data sets. Premium capacity or premium per user? Well, yeah, premium per user as well, because there's no Power BI licensing needed at all. Does anyone else have a news item that they want to share with the group? Feel free to unmute on that side or raise your hand on this side and I'll have you speak up. Particular news items.
You're staring at me.
Yeah, do you want to talk about the upcoming
Sure.
events?
Sure.
All right, scream at this microphone.
All right. Come up, see, and be blinded. Okay. Steve Urbach, coming up on October 11th and 12th, 13th, 14th. That whole second week in October is the User Group Summit, which happens every year. However, last year, of course, it was virtual only, but it is a conglomeration of user groups associated with dynamic communities, which includes the Power BI user group, Power Platform, all of the Power things, and all of the ERP systems as well. I'm going to it in Houston. I have a presentation to make during the summit. So that is coming up in less than 2 weeks.
And I know we have people in the community who are interested to know who else in the user community was going. So raise your hand or chat into the hybrid if you're going. Is there people that are planning?
Barb?
No. Barb?
Jarrett's team is actually doing 1 or 2 presentations.
All right.
Summit. So
Nice.
specifically on Power BI, and then we have a few other attendees that will be doing presentations on Business Central, but Kate's doing 1 or 2 presentations
Nice.
on Power BI.
So Barbara was pointing out that Whipsley's got people actually going and doing presentations there. So there's at least 2, 3 in our local community that are planning on going there. So look forward to that one. Any other news items someone would like to share? Going once. All right.
From a recommended resources perspective, not
Yeah.
necessarily news. I'm
Yeah.
sure this is one of the more popular ones, but Guide and Cube, if you guys haven't discovered that, I've
So-
gotten a ton of stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point. In case anybody didn't hear, recommended resources, there's a few of them on this link. There's so many, it's hard to put them all on the slide. So type into the chat if you've got a favorite that we didn't mention there. And someone here was mentioning Guy in a Cube. So those of you getting started with Power BI, trying to understand it a bit, Guy in a Cube, if you search for it, is a great selection of videos alongside Kerbal. You know her name, Steve.
Yes, I don't remember it offhand.
Okay. She does great stuff. Kratos BI is Chris Wagner.
I don't know what her
he's
last name is.
He's local. What'd you say?
First name is Ruth. I can't think of her last name right now for Kerbal.
Yep. And Kratos BI is Chris Wagner. He's actually in Milwaukee, and we've had him present before. He does some great stuff. Chris Webb's BI blog is one of my favorites. It gets really technical really fast, but that's the space I live in, so I like his stuff. And for those that like podcasts, I'm a fan of that, listening in my car. BI Focal is a great show to listen on all things related to Power BI and news. If you have another favorite, put it into the chat right now. Give us a link.
Paul, I was just going to share that on Meetup, the Meetup site, if you increase your distance to any distance and type in Power Space BI, you're going to get like worldwide, a lot of user groups are using Meetup, and a lot of them online, and a couple of big names coming up at some of the users group down in Texas. So I encourage people to look at those. They're mostly evening events, but to take a look at what's out there. That's
good.
it.
Good point. Thanks, Nicole. Any other resource suggestions? Going once, going twice. All right. Next is our user shares. I'm going to turn the share over to Dustin for the first one. Are you ready to do your user share?
I can. I know that Josh and Uday, or I thought they had one too, but maybe let me go second. Let me pull it up.
All right. Josh, are you ready?
Sure.
All right. I'm going to mute over here and see if you want to try and test your sound. See how that works. And share into the meetup. Do you want to do it that way, or how do you want to do it?
I can just stand up there too.
Okay.
And just bring my computer up.
That works too. The video feed to the room is right here. And then I will leave the mic on my computer for you to talk to. But let me disconnect the video.
You can type that. Because I had mine turned on too.
Oh, you can share from there? Yeah. This back in. So at least the room can see what you're going to share, because we'll do it back. You got to share into the Teams meeting.
Yep.
Okay.
Just bring everything up first.
Let me know if sound's not working properly for you guys.
So speakers are muted.
Yeah, because you're not using yours now. Back in
Sound seems okay, but visual, we've got half of a presentation and half of the Teams screen.
Okay, there we go. Now I can hear you. How's it coming through?
Good.
Share.
There we go. Good presentation.
Oh, got it. All right, so the topic I wanted to present on today was how to use Azure Data Factory to automate data movement. Specifically looking at how can we take and bring data maybe that's on premise and push it into Azure, or take data that's in Azure or in the cloud and push it somewhere else. I have a couple different examples I'm going to show through, but first I want to start off by talking what is Azure Data Factory. So really it's an online ETL as a service. So it's a way to take and transform data or move data from one place to another, or take data out of something and put it into another file format. If you're used to using SQL Server integration services, it's very similar to that. Now there are some differences in terms of what you get in one and what you get in the other. Azure Data Factory is still coming up to speed with the options that it does have, but it is a low code environment just like SSIS was. So you don't have to know any kind of code to get started with it. It's a drag and drop interface. I got an example on the screen here as well of kind of a basic one you would see. It's all controlled from Azure. So if you're going to this, you need a web browser to be able to get to it. They develop all on the web. It has its own development site. It's all controlled when you build it under your actual Azure subscription, so you can turn it on and off whenever you need to. And then as part of that, there's a few different ways you would go and do this. So you'd start with ingesting things. You bring them into what they call the control flow area. And you also can use data flows. So if you're familiar with the way Power BI does data flows, they do have that capability in there as well. And then you have the ability to schedule things. So if you need something to run every hour or daily or whatever it may be, you can schedule it. And then they have built-in monitoring right within the tool. So you don't have to put in another monitoring solution to find out whether this is working or not. They have the monitoring. You can check to see, did it fail? What's my error? How often it's running? All of that stuff right within the same interface. So this is an overview really of the environment. So this is the main landing page you really come into if you've been developing before. Otherwise, you'll land on the home page, which is the home button in the top of that. And it'll give you some examples that you can start with. It does have some templates you can bring in. If you haven't used it before, it's a good way to play around with it. But really on this main page, you have a few different sections. And it starts with the pipeline. So really your pipeline is your automation flow to track from start to finish what you want to do. Below that is a data set. A data set is really your connection to any of your source, whether that's Excel, a website, you name it, SQL Server, whatever it may be, that's really where those live. And then they have Power Query and data flows below that as well. So you can tap right into some additional features that you may be used to already. From there, you have your monitoring or your activity area where you can see how many dashboards or pipelines do I have running, when do they run, are they triggered? So it's not called a schedule in Azure Data Factory, it's called a trigger. When are they triggered? When did it run? And this is really where you go and see, okay, I have this pipeline, runs every night at 8 p.m. Looks like last night it failed. In there, I can see the actual error and gather what that information might be so I can fix it. And then you can go through and debug some things and look at any other alerts that you want to set up. The last piece in the environment is what they call the manage area. So in the manage area, this is how you set up your gateway, which you need for any kind of on-premise resources. So you will have another gateway outside of the Power BI one. You would have this as well. That would allow you to connect to SQL servers on-premise, file shares, anything that's in your network that's not connected to Azure, you can use that. It's also how you look at the connections you make to a source. Those are called linked services. So you plug in the information, whether that's a file path or an IP address or a server name. All of that is then managed through here, so you can connect and tell the accounts that you want to go through. This is an example of, I wouldn't say too crazy of a process to run, but it does a few different things. And the reason I chose this is because it kind of shows what you can do with something like this. This is actually the example I'll kind of walk through today. We'll actually go in the Azure Data Factory and kind of walk through the different pieces. But really it starts with, I have an Azure SQL database that I'm pulling data into. In order to process it, the first thing I'm going to do is scale it up so I have enough resources so it's not going to take me hours to process millions of rows. So once I scale it up, I then wait a little bit to make sure it completes. And then I'm going through and clearing out some of my staging tables before pushing the data into it. The next ones I've kind of blanked out a little bit, but they're pipelines. So in a pipeline, I can call another pipeline. So I can embed things and nest things down. So I've called different pipelines that do my loading for different tables and different source systems, and also pull in some Amazon data. So I'm not just using one cloud here, but I'm using 2 different clouds. Once I've pulled in all of my source data into my Azure database or Azure SQL database, I then run a stored procedure. So now I'm using another function that isn't necessarily built into Azure Data Factory, but built into another platform I can tap into. So I call that stored procedure to clean up my data, get it ready to actually push for this specific instance back to where they needed the data. So it actually started on an on-premise data source and an Azure data or an Amazon database. I brought them together to clean them up and kind of compare them. And now I'm actually going to push it back into Amazon, where they ultimately needed some of this data. And at the very end, I scale down. What you see here is you see a couple different lines. You have green lines and red lines. So I can fail on any different one of these, and it will capture and make sure I scale that resource down so it's not sitting at a higher price level when I'm not using it. If it all succeeds and goes through, it will go through and hit that final step either way. So I do have some error capturing and handling in here that I can put in place as well. So now I'm going to jump into the actual Azure Data Factory. So let's start with just a blank one here. So like I said, this is the main landing page that you would normally go into when you're starting to develop. I mentioned earlier, it's a drag and drop. So if I open this up and I want to start a new pipeline, maybe I want to gather data, I bring that on and I can now start copying data once I start plugging in my sources. So I have a source. This could be a SQL server. So let's say I wanted to create a new one. I have a list of several different sources I can tap into. Depending on where your data is, we can scroll through this list and see what options we have. So there's some in the cloud, there's some on premise. It just depends on where your data is to gather it. Once I've plugged in and set up my source, I would then go to what they call a sink. I don't understand the term here, why they chose that for people that are going from SSIS over to this, but that's what they call it. That is really my destination. So I can then plug in the same kind of thing. It's going to allow me to choose similar options. So maybe I wanted to go to a data lake. I'm taking raw data from a file or from a SQL server and dumping it into a data lake. However I needed to get that data across. This is a fairly basic and most common used transformation or activity is the move and copy. Really, there's several different things you can go in here and do. There's a lot under general, but really, I would say Azure Data Factory is still coming along with the things it can do. I have found some nuances, especially with the whole Amazon and Microsoft project I just worked on, is how do I take data out of Amazon? That was very simple. So it has a connector to pull out of Amazon, but I couldn't push it back in just as easy. So I actually had to end up writing some scripts to go through and actually push that data back into Amazon that now use a different function. So because this is a platform as a service offering, you can see that you might have to tap into multiple different pieces of the cloud to get something done. If this was a box solution, something like SQL Server, where you get all the tools in one product, you could stay within one area. With being a platform as a service, they're offering up the tool, then having you leverage some of their other technologies to complete any of the solutions you're looking for. So that's a basic one. So let's jump back to the one I was showing before. So if I look at this again, like I said, these are nested pipelines. So if I clicked on this, I could see, let me drag this up a little, that I'm actually going and loading a different pipeline. So a copy of that looking back only 70 days. I have the same capability where I can pass variables and parameters to all of these. So if I needed to pass in a different path or a different file name, I could loop through files and get different file names and pass them down the line if I needed to. Any questions?
If you have questions, feel free to kind of unmute there. We'll hear them here. Raise your hand in the room. All right, Greg's got one.
You said you need a data gateway. Is that installed on like each SQL server?
You install it, so it's called the Integration Services Gateway, I think is the last name I've seen on it. You install it on one server as long as it can reach out to your other servers, kind of like the gateway does, Power BI gateway. It can tap into it. Now, if you have disconnected, which we've been seeing a lot of manufacturing, we have they may have a PC connected to a machine. You would have to install one gateway there and then one in everywhere else that it can communicate, because that's not on that same network. But you would only need one for your environment unless it can't reach something.
Sure. Okay. Question.
Yep.
It's around the pricing. So obviously I do love the tool, but it's always hard to recommend because everyone's, well, how much is it going to cost? And I know that the main cost is how many DIUs you use, push data through the pipeline. What is the average cost on, say the project you just did, like a monthly cost?
You want to repeat the question, Josh?
Yeah.
In case they didn't get it?
Yeah. So the question is, what is the average cost to run something like what I'm showing here on a monthly basis? Because it's a pay-as-you-go scale, yes, it can slide. So I'm only running this once a day, and it runs for about an hour. So I think on average, this is costing like $5, $7. It's really cheap to do.
A day, right?
Yeah, $5 a day.
How many DIUs do you use, or do you not?
I haven't checked in a while. I actually completed this like a month ago, and it's been working up until recently. So I'll probably end up going back and seeing if I need to scale up. But most of my performance issues that I noticed in this were not related to this tool. So I could run it very quickly. It was actually on the SQL Server side, or the Azure SQL side, where I saw my performance, which was driving my cost up. But really, to do something like this, I think the largest step I have, one of the processes runs for 30 minutes because it has to process multi-million rows every day because there's no main key. So this does come back to also data quality and integrity to make sure you can process things efficiently. Because yes, you don't want something running for 2 hours and costing you $30-40 a day or every couple hours, because you have to run it multiple times a day because your data isn't in a format that's going to work for it. But I'd say most of the time, I'm seeing it under $5 or $6 on average for what I've run.
So Gina's got a question.
There's a question in the chat. Did you see it?
Yep, this is Tina. I have 2 questions actually. So I tried to create a data flow this past week. And one issue I had is we have 2 different servers with 2 different SQL Server databases, and it seems like I had to do a self-hosted connection back to the other SQL Server. Is that correct, or am I just missing something? I should be able to do it.
I believe you're just missing something with your gateway. The self-hosted, it is really meant for stuff that's in the cloud. You should have a gateway that connects on-prem resources and what Microsoft is using as their self-hosted gateway to tap into everything else. So if they are split, yes, you would have to use both gateways, but really we've tapped into everything with just a single gateway, and you shouldn't have to nest or jump between both of them to get to something.
Okay, so that's probably something I'm doing wrong. And then the other question I had was between like doing joins and filters and expressions within a data flow versus like calling a stored procedure. Do you have recommendations of one way or the other?
Yes, but I would say this is personal and company preference on where you want to embed your logic. Do you want it embedded in a database that does all your processing already? Or do you want to have another spot where you're having to write the same logic potentially multiple times for each pipeline, data flow, whatever you're doing? So if you want to do it once and call it multiple times, I would say it makes more sense to be in the database or in a stored procedure so you can call it wherever you need versus doing it in a pipeline. If you're writing it once and it's only used for that process, yes, maybe you could get away with it, but now anytime you need to change it, you now have to redeploy that pipeline versus just changing the stored procedure.
Perfect. I take it that's your preference.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for confirming.
Yep. And I noticed there's Jeff had a question. There's a Git button in the management tools. Can you export these flows, check them into repository, and then import them into a different flow instance? And the answer, I haven't used Git, but from everything I've been told is the answer is yes. You should be able to take it, export it into Git, and then push it back wherever you need to.
I can say, this is Paul, that I have done that. So yes, it supports DevOps integration with the Git repository, and then you can do branching and checking and merging of your code like you do other things in Git.
Sounds like you heard that. Any other questions?
You said it was working up until recently.
Yeah, so the process still works. This is more of an amount of data issue. And I have to figure out why it's doing this, because it's really my last table I'm processing, but it is filling up TempDB in my Azure database. And I have not figured out why, and that's even with adding scale to it. So I'll have to dig back in to see if I can narrow down what.
But you said you're bringing in millions of rows every day, right?
For a table, yes. The other ones are I have a date in them, so I'm filtering only 70 days. But there's one table that doesn't have a date, unfortunately. So yeah, it's bringing in a couple million rows. So sometimes it fails on that table, sometimes it doesn't. So I don't know if it's just a timing thing on when it hits. So I have to dig into why TempDB is giving me the issue for it. But I can actually show where I saw that. So if I look at the monitoring, as long as it all works, you can see here's what I'm looking at from the monitoring. It tells me all of my tasks succeeded, but the overall running of the package did not. And here is my error. If I hover over and click it, you can see the database TempDB has reached a size quota, partition or delete data, drop indexes, or consult the documentation. With Azure SQL, I don't really have control over TempDB anymore, so I can't manage that database. So I have to work around it with limiting data and see if I can pull in chunks of data now versus trying to pull a million rows at a time.
So who does control the TempDB?
So with Azure SQL, and I can do another presentation on Azure SQL too, potentially in the future for this group. Azure SQL is a database as a service. So you're really just managing the databases you want. So you get access to a very rudimentary copy of master, and then your database you create. So Microsoft then takes care of the instance and TempDB and any maintenance and patching and everything behind the scenes. You only have to worry about your database then.
I see Jeff had a question about comparing Azure Data Factory, Azure Synapse. I'll take a stab at it and you can correct me if you have thoughts, Josh. Our experience and we started with Azure Data Factory, then chose Synapse, was that Synapse has within it Azure Data Factory. Azure Data Factory handles what we saw today, the movement of data and the orchestration, the timing and the triggers. That is inside Synapse. They call them Synapse pipelines, and they look exactly like Data Factory.
It is Data Factory.
It is. Under the hood, yeah.
We did find that there are things in Synapse that aren't, there are things in Azure Data Factory that are very new that aren't in Synapse. Mm-hmm. It takes about 3 months for it to make its way from Azure Data Factory into Synapse right now. But I would suspect that Microsoft's plan is that those two things are going to be pretty much the same.
Yeah. So Synapse is the reason you would go with something like Synapse is you want beyond just what Azure Data Factory is supplying. So Azure Data Factory is really that pipeline tool, whereas now you add Synapse and you get the larger scale picture of data warehousing and data lakes and everything else that you can bring together in one common platform with a single area to do multiple different types of querying against it.
I will say what we found too was Synapse wants to be kind of that one place. Setting it up is still 15 different things inside Synapse. Yeah. So it had the illusion of being one thing, but when you need to set it up, you still need to set up 15 different services inside of it.
So, I mean, Synapse is kind of, like you said, the umbrella, right? And if you subscribe to it, you still have nothing, right? But it is the one-stop shop. So they used to have a product called Azure Data Warehouse. which is now transitioned into Azure Synapse. So you spin up a Synapse instance, you still say, okay, I want a data factory. And if you say, okay, now I want a lake, so you add a data lake to your Synapse environment. And then you say, okay, well, now I want data warehouse. There's two different types. There's the dedicated SQL resources, which would be something similar to data or Azure SQL data.
Yeah.
And then they have the serverless SQL pools, which is more on demand. So the thing I like about Azure is it can do data factory. And like you said, it's not completely on one-to-one, but if you know data factory, you can do Synapse. And you showed an ETL process where you're actually transforming your data. I should say, I'm saying we, but it's really me. I prefer an ELT process where I take all the data from the source and just dump it into a data lake. And then between my data lake and my data warehouse, I will do my T. But in this scenario where you don't have that middle piece, it makes perfect sense.
And I kind of do. So I bring it all into the same before I do any processing,
Right.
other than pulling limited scale just for budgetary purposes. But yeah.
And the nice part about Synapse too, when you're using it with Power BI, is you can actually create Power BI data sets in Synapse, right? So from your data warehouse, you can just say, and so then as a user, I can go into my app.powerbi.com and I can see the data set right there for me. I can start building apps on top of it. So it really is their whole data platform play. They do sell individual pieces with Data Factory if you want to move data back and forth and you already have some of that infrastructure in place. But that's kind of the idea behind Synapse.
Yeah, it's really meant to, Synapse is really meant to allow you to plug and play pieces of the cloud that you don't have today. So if you didn't have a tool like SSIS, you could plug and play Azure Data Factory in there and get some of the other features as well with it. Or if you didn't want that, you don't have to turn it on at that point then. So.
All right.
Hope
Thank
that
you.
Hopefully. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that was good clarification. All right. Thank you so much, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will call to the floor. Dustin, how you doing? Do you have a user share for us? Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
Such a sign of the times, right? Talking with your camera on, but muted. I have a quick user share, and then I think I have kind of a conversation point maybe for the discussion afterwards. So Josh made a tough act to follow. That was certainly a well done presentation. Mine's more of a bookmarking and little just kind of tip and trick that I like to do within within Power BI. So I can share that. So one thing, again, this is kind of a simple trick that maybe a lot of you know, but it involves some bookmarking. So it's came up a few times where when you have your drill down features, you can kind of drill up or drill down into a visual, but you don't get that same functionality of the interactions where it kind of updates the rest of your report based on that. So one thing I like to do in order to kind of gain that functionality is use some buttons. So I'm going to remove that visual, and then I'll actually create a couple of visuals here where I have one for group and one for region, so then I can use the buttons to actually drill into that image or hide and unhide the visualization. But then I'm able to get some of that interactivity from each individual visualization versus not having that from the others. So that's something that I kind of like to do with my reports, to where I can get that cross-filtering and those interactions out of each visual. And I guess for some of those who may or may not have used a technique like that before, what I'm doing is I take from my selection pane, I create some bookmarks, and within my visuals here, if you trace it down, you can see where, depending upon which bookmark I'm using, I'm hiding and whoops, not that one. I'm hiding and unhiding those visuals. So it's actually this one here that gets hidden and unhidden, and then this one here. So again, not a groundbreaking tip. Definitely a lot less information dense than what we just just received, but a little trick that I like to do to kind of add some of that navigation to my report. So I like to try and make the design be as simple as possible, so people kind of know where they're at based on the different locations and kind of the navigation and the buttons built in.
Nice. Did anyone have any questions, thoughts?
I don't have a question, but it's more of a comment. So along with this, it really just helps the end user be able to navigate, like Dustin said, without having to try and find or hover over or make sure you're clicked on the right visual for really those arrows to show up. It also allows you to, if you needed to at any point, turn off that header because you don't want drill down capabilities or anything turned on. You can turn off that whole header now, and all of those arrows then go away for you.
Nice.
Yeah, we found that it helps with adoption. So if somebody's really used to a different type of a report or getting their information in a different way, it's kind of a nice way to spoon feed some of this data and make the interface a little bit easier to work with.
Nice. Any other questions? Going once. Going twice. All right.
Not only is he a Toastmaster, but he's an auctioneer.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, whatever. You have to talk really fast, right? Okay. Thank you so much, Dustin. For my user share, let me get set up here. I'm going to talk a bit about and showcase a Power BI report that I built to monitor our Azure costs. So it ties pretty well into what kinds of things come out of our Synapse and our Azure Data Factory in terms of numbers on costs, and showcase how I turned that into a Power BI report that I thought people might find interesting. So let me get my share going here. Give me a second. I don't want this to be full screen anymore. All right, I'll share my screen now. All right, I'm going to go into my Power BI environment for work and give you an overview of what the Power BI report looks like that's pulling in all our Azure costs, and then how I chose to use Power BI visual and colors and things to break down and draw attention to where the costs are going and that kind of thing, as well as you'll get some idea of how Azure costs track. So in our Power BI environment, I'm going to search for that report real quick, so I'm going to bookmark that easily. And this is our Azure costs report. When it comes up, I've pulled the data once a month on our Azure environment's costs and put them into a data file in our storage account. And then Power BI side, I reach in and read in that data. So this arrangement here is to try and help show where the costs are going. The eye intended to be drawn right to the top here and kind of show how the costs are growing. So it's broken down by month, and the rest of the visuals are to break out all the other types of information we have about the Azure costs, because they do allow you to export every single cost down to exactly which component in your Azure environment did it. So this right here is a breakdown by consumed service. So services are broken down inside Azure into compute, storage, recovery services, SQL type operations, web. Let me expand this out so you can see all the others that show up when I expand out. Postgres might be up in your Azure environment because the place allows for all of these kind of services to be launched and run. And then I organized it visually to point out with data bars where most of our costs are coming from in this category. So most of our costs are in compute. Makes sense. We have a lot of virtual machines that have been moved to the Azure environment, and some of our change in cost over time was a matter of using the Power BI model to have a measure the changes over time. It compares the average cost over the last 3 months to what it was last month. And if it changes a lot, then this change column helps highlight those things that are growing the most. Because if we go back and look at the main report, the first questions that people ask about this kind of growth is where is it happening and why? Because this trend line is pretty steady and could get pretty costly. So seeing that change is happening a lot in compute. The next kind of breakdown under is a little lower than compute. We can get into premium files and managed disk and virtual machines that either have 4 cores versus 6. And this is a much longer list, but it starts to break things down into, well, is it related to backup? Our biggest thing is backup, and our biggest changes are happening with premium file, apparently. We can go back and break it down, show a breakdown then by the service involved. So this is more general, again, a shorter list. This is storage, so you can see some patterns. It's just a different breakdown of the same costs. It's in storage, that's where the change is happening the most. Virtual machines are our biggest expense, and it's one of the second most changing and accelerating. And down on the bottom is Azure Synapse Analytics. We actually have saved money because we were using some things in Azure Synapse, and we backed off once we experimented with how does that work in our environment. So there's a big, now here there's a positive change of less money in Azure Synapse. And then down below there's a trend line that goes over date and time. Now what's been nice is we can also bring in data related to categorizing each of those areas by what we want to categorize them in the business. So in this case, we put tags inside Azure and pull them into this report. This is a tag that's around IT shared resources. If you click on that, you're only looking at those things within our Azure environment that relate to shared resources. You're seeing a trend of how that's growing. We have a CloudGenix type of area, and we can see how that cost has changed over time. The one that I'm most responsible for relates to our business intelligence area, which I'm going to scroll through until I find it here. It's down, I think it's farther down. Where'd it go? Because I keep an eye on the business intelligence one the closest, because these are our tools with Synapse and everything. Where did it? Maybe it's on the bottom. There it is. So if I click that, there's our trend line for how we've been using things with Azure and Synapse. As we scaled up certain areas, we could see it grow, we could see it scale back, and this report allows us to kind of track that over time and talk internally around who's responsible for what area and keeping an eye on the cost growth in there, because when we zoom back out and clear this, this is clearly on an upward trend line. And then I took advantage of some features of Power BI to create a projection. There's settings within the visual for the line chart that you can actually have it project out in the future with a error of margin, what those costs might look like as it goes on in the future. And this is what I use to shock and awe the executives who are paying for all this.
Is that automated? AI, is that just automated?
It uses whatever routines are part of. The question was like, how is that projection done? I did not come up with a calculation. I relied on the built-in projection feature of the Power BI visual line chart. So it's doing.
Is this the standard line chart?
Standard line chart.
I've seen this.
Yep. This is a standard line chart. And if you go into the, maybe I can even adjust it here. If I hit this in edit mode, you can edit some things in the browser. Right here are some of the settings for this visual. If I select it, I should be able to go find that projection settings. Under here, maybe it's under here. There we go. So there's a forecast option under this analytics area for the visual. And in the forecast, we can say how many months we want it to go out, because it assumes you have to have a time-based analysis going on. And then in this case, I wanted to ignore the last 1 month, because that way it avoided questions over, well, yeah, it's shooting up just because of this month. I'm ignoring this month, past month. I'm doing it on the other ones. What was interesting and a learning experience for me was this confidence interval, because what I thought when I read confidence interval was that if I made that confidence interval larger, then the bar get wider. It's the opposite. So I think the way to describe confidence interval is to say, how confident do you want to be that your projection will be within the gray area? The more confident you want to be, then the wider it gets, because if you're like, oh, I want my number to fall in the gray area, well, then it's going to make the gray area bigger and bigger. So that was my user share to showcase a bit of editing, Power BI reporting, and
Paul,
what
I
kind
have
of
a question.
visuals you could do with that.
Paul, I have a question.
We got a question in the room real quick. Thanks, Nicole. Then I'll get to yours.
You said
Okay.
you were cutting back on Synapse costs.
Yes.
Was that because you saw something on this app that you were like, oh yeah, we don't want to do that, or
Let's.
strategic decision?
I seem to think my memory error is because we tried Purview, Microsoft Purview, for a few months, and then we decided it wasn't for us. So looking at this and coming back into where's the most costly parts, because I can even hold down the control key and select this costly month here. This Power BI allow me to keep surfing through this data. We saved money on a VM, and what else was it? Oh no, the cost would go down. I got to select this month. I'm using the trackpad. Where's my mouse? There we go. Well, now it might be locked up. The biggest cost I remember saving was we tried Purview for a month or two, and then we stopped doing that. And then
once they took it out of preview, we were just
Yep.
like, not paying for that.
Yeah. So the biggest savings here, sort this way.
Paul, just a reminder to repeat the questions from the room.
Okay, yep. The question was, where was the most savings? So I'm trying to do that in the report. My memory is that the up and down that you're seeing here, the major down point here was related to, we tried out Purview in these months and then we stopped, which is a feature of Microsoft selling that relates to data governance and discoverability, a tool that'll monitor the entire environment. Wasn't for us, and it saved us money not using it. And then there's a low period here, and then you can see it jump back up again as we start to scale up more and more of the nightly runs that are gathering more and more data, because we'll be completely cut over to Azure Synapse instead of on-premise resources within the next month. So.
Farrell, have you thought about templatizing?
I have it once in a while, but part of what I'd like to know, the question was, have I thought of templatizing it? So that I could make this Power BI report available to others that could analyze the cost in their environment. The key will be, what are most people have access to when it comes to their Azure costs? In our case, we're not actually exporting from the built-in Azure screens, because we get our Azure services from 3Cloud, which sits in between us and Microsoft. So we have to get all our costs from 3Cloud. So I built it to work with what 3Cloud will give me, not what Microsoft will give you, but it's my
Well,
view.
that kind of gets at my question, and I have to step away for a few minutes, but
Okay.
it's, can you share how you got access to the data?
Sure. In this case, let's see here, the 3Cloud is our provider for those Azure services. I'm not an expert on how one pays Microsoft, but obviously my company gets most of that through 3Cloud and managed through 3Cloud. We don't deal directly with Microsoft. So what 3Cloud gave us was a tool where you could go to their website, Cloud Health, and export the file monthly. So I log into it and I manually export the file once a month. I have been tempted to automate that, build out something that'll talk to the Cloud Health API, but I don't really want to program against web services. I got out of web programming in '95 and I don't want to go back. But then the file ends up looking like, I think I have a couple samples here. I'm going to bring up a sample of the file so you can see the raw file, not store, the raw file that I download, so you get a sense of that, because that's an easy, I can show you that quick. Let's see if I have one here while that's loading. Azure. file right there. One sec. What I'm doing right now to go get the file to show you is I load the file to our Azure storage account, our data lake. So in order to access things within your Azure storage accounts, you have Azure Storage Explorer, which I'm going down through quick to get to the files just so I can show you the once a month. It's a CSV and the types of columns that are in it.
Unrelated, while this is loading, do you do analytics directly out of your lake, or do you always move it to a more structured database?
We have done both. There's half and half. There's plenty of cases where it's just from the lake. Oh yeah, the question was, do we do analytics from the lake, or do we make certain to take from the lake into a structured database before doing reporting or Power BI? And I can say that we do both. There are cases where adding it to a relational database didn't really add value. In this case, there's no database involved. The CSVs are sitting on the lake and Power BI reads them right from the lake. So let me show you those files. Come on, why am I not seeing my, oh, because I'm not looking at. Quick access, attach Cosmos, prime production, storage accounts. Oh, it needs me to relog in. Hold on, reauthenticate. Cloud services, you have to reauthenticate. Okay, I can return to Storage Explorer now. I'm signed in. There we go. I am still getting connected to my storage account so that I can see the files. Bear with me. All right, there we go. Let me get into the files I've got in the storage. Slowly, apparently. There we go. Okay, Azure costs. So this would help understand that basically you're seeing files, each one is a month. You can see kind of the files laid out by month, and each is a CSV that export the data. And then let me download one just to show you what file fields come through from this, because I think 3Cloud or from Azure, it's probably very similar. It's exactly what layer of Azure is this, and then what dollar amount of compute or what was happening with that.
Are you looping through this, or are you just pulling a file for your Power BI report?
In this case, since we had Synapse, I'm actually asking Power BI to issue a query against the lake. So I treat everything in this folder like one big table. So Power BI does a select call, and it just reads in all these files because they're all the same format. And then expand this out to the types of data fields that come into each CSV. There's subscription goods for the subscription in Azure. There's the service layer, the service type, the consume service. Apparently there's goods for everything. There's a good for the meter, which region that's in. Sorry, I'm jumping around. This is the region, so most of our stuff is all Eastern US, though we have some Azure resources in other regions. And then it gets all the way down to the component, which you can see up here is a big, long idea what subscription it's in, what resource group, all the way down. It could be the server name. So this can be parsed if you wanted to get all the way down into the component level details. So on the report, I basically went, all right, let's divide up into these categories and sum them up and sort them by, okay, what are our highest level services? Okay, it's within database versus compute. So, any other questions? None in the room here. Going once. Going twice. All right. Then I will stop sharing. Well, actually, I can say, do we have, Uday, are you doing a share?
I've got one I can do.
All right. I'll let you share your screen. We can hear you here.
So I'm just going to be talking a little bit about leveraging Power BI apps. It's not app like Power App, confused me the first time too, but it's a feature within Power BI where you can leverage to pretty much better manage and maintain all the reports and services that you have available for your company, end users, whoever. So we'll just talk a little bit about, when and how should you go about doing this. So to start off, really, the real benefit of using an app is that you can improve your end user experience. You can consolidate all your reports into a simple, organized structure. Again, you can simplify the process of just being able to go in and access what you have available to your end users. You can create a one-stop shop for everything and really start to define and develop that network where people can go to get access to whatever they need. So to start, really, when should you consider using them? There's a bunch of reasons, but the big ones I like to think of are, do you find yourself with a bunch of different workspaces? Do you have a bunch of different reports deployed for different reasons? Do you have duplicate reports in different workspaces? Do you have trouble finding them? Are single users having to go through multiple workspaces and find what they're looking for? And the biggest one that I've seen before is really, do a lot of people just have a bunch of bookmarks in a folder on their Google Chrome or whatever, or just really trying to leverage as much as possible that favorites feature that Power BI has? So if any of those sound like you, lean up, because this is definitely for you and your team. So now we can dive into a little bit about how you should get started. Really the best case is, you have already started off and you've deployed a couple of reports, and you have one workspace where a lot of people are going to. That's usually going to be your best one. So if you can figure out what your most commonly used workspace is, where a lot of your reports are already deployed, that's ideally where you'd want to start. If you're a little bit more fresh, or you kind of just want to have a soft reset, you can create a brand new workspace and move all your reports and data sets over to that new location as a secondary option. So you'll notice that whenever you're in the workspace, you can have this button here that says include in app. Sometimes it'll be on default and sometimes it'll be off. But for all the reports that have high utilization, people definitely want to use right off the bat, you can just check those ones to on or yes, as you can see I've done for a couple of these. And then if it's your first time, you might see create an app, or if it's your second time, you'll probably see update app. So as soon as you hit that, you'll be taken to your setup menu. So here you can redefine the name of your app. You can give a little description, and then you can provide a support site. So you could either choose to link your company website, maybe a SharePoint that you use for information management, anything you'd like. And then ideally you would want to put your company logo or the company logo, pick a nice little color that fits it. And then for contact information, you can either just show whoever published the app or specify people or whatever you'd like from those options. Next is the fun part, is navigation. So this is where you primarily will go. Actually, this is the spot where you'll go to manage how the app is structured. So when you first start off, you'll probably have nothing except for all of the apps that you have selected yes on in that previous window. They'll just be listed all the way down, but if you did that, you're not really leveraging apps to the best of the capabilities. So first thing is you kind of want to think about how you want to structure really what this is going to look like. You can do that by breaking out, departments and business units, or you can look at it by doing it more on a report basis. So financial reports will go here, production reports will go here, sales reports will go here. It's really up to the end user or the team that's creating the app, but that's a big component of it and one that should definitely be discussed. Ideally, at least what I like to do is, the company summary report, I always put it the first at the very top in no bucket at all, because as soon as you jump into the app, that's the first thing people are going to see. So the number one app that your company is using would definitely go first. The next one down, I always like to make it a a section for reports that is applicable to everybody in the company. So it doesn't matter if you're in sales, finance, production, whatever. It's something that everybody can leverage. And then below is where you can start to alphabetically put in the different departments that you'd like or report types. After you've started to do this, or at least define what you want it to do, you can hit the new button. This will open up an option for you for new and for section. Section is where you'll go about making those different folders almost, which is kind of like how they're acting. And then new is where you'll be able to input either the link to the report if it's external from your workspace, or whenever you add a new report that's in that workspace, you can go to that link and then just change the section and it'll drop it right where it needs to go. I think, yeah, here. And when you publish your app, this is kind of what it'll look like for the end users if everything's consolidated down. They'll see the different sections or the report name, and then a little folder where they can open it up and then start to look at the different reports that they have inside. And the last part, not as fun as the last, but the one before, but permissions. So ideally, if you're making this app, you kind of just want to give it to everybody in the organization. There's one thing to note, though, is that if you decide to do that, it'll give all users who have this access to all the reports in the workspace where this is being published out of. So if you've got financial data or you've got salary data in a workspace and you build off of that one, everybody's going to know everybody's salary, unless you put in, some other features like security, like RLS or something. But that's one thing to keep a note of because you don't want to do that by accident. The other thing that I like to do whenever starting to deploy is use the specific individuals or groups button, where you can specify just a couple of people and say, hey, only you can see this app. Can you test it out for me? And then whenever you're ready, you can make that switch to make it available for everybody. I'm sure you've seen this before with data sets. So how are they allowed to connect? Can they get to the underlying data? All that fun stuff. That's where you can specify these. Ideally, you'll just keep it the same as whatever your IT department has set up or your BI team, or just keep it the same as whatever you have in the data sets for the reports that you've already published. And then just, some notes on deploying and getting this out there. Same image. I would say begin to communicate this with users whenever you're trying to deploy. Hey, here's this link, test this out. Always try to get a couple of people using it first, and then slowly, I'm sure we've all experienced it where you make one report and now you've got everybody in every department asking for something. So it'll catch on. It just might take a little bit slower or longer, but definitely share with a couple of people to start and then move from there. One thing to note for sure is that this app sits on top of your workspace. So if you make a change and you publish it up, then it's going to be updated in your workspace, but not the app until you've updated it. So that's one thing you can leverage as like a testing, like an intermediate testing phase, or you just have to make sure that every time you've made changes, you go back to the app and make an update to it as well. Always just start off from the ground floor, structuring this, and then slowly build into it as you develop more and more and more reports. And then finally, just start early. I had to do this for another company, and when we already had a lot of apps deployed, not thinking about this, not leveraging it, not using it from the get-go was really tricky because people, for some reason, liked bookmarks, but that was on them. So always start early, always try to get something in here, even if it's one or two reports. I've always found that you can always go up and build onto it rather than just stop. Any questions on the presentation before I start clicking around and showing you one of these?
Feel free to unmute. No one's raising hands here in the room yet.
Shocking. I like it. All right. So this is essentially the interface. So I've opened up one of the reports that we have under the business development group called the new logo report. After I've opened this, I've clicked on the report, and anytime you have pages in a report, you'll see those listed out here. So I can click through these and get to the different pages if I wanted to. But now, let's say I wanted to go to another report that I know I have somewhere. In another scenario, I'd have to open a new tab and go play hide and seek. but not anymore because it's right below it. I know it's in the business development section. I'm just going to go ahead and click on it. And just like that, I've been able to open a report that I know I have access to, that I need the numbers on, that is in this workspace. So one thing you might be thinking is if I have a bunch of workspaces and I really need to figure out what's going on in reports in other workspaces, you can actually just create report links to in the app, and it'll jump you to the workspace without you having to really do anything. So let me go ahead and close this and find a good example. Right here. So I want to go now and I want to find a Power BI demo that our applications team has developed. I know the applications team did it, so I'm going to open this and I'm going to see here, Power BI demo. You'll notice that there's no downwards arrow here, and that's because this isn't a report that's in the workspace where I publish the app. However, I can still make it easy for users to find it because it's right here for them. As soon as they click it, it just opens in a new tab. And voila. Now they have this report that's in a completely different workspace that they might have had to bookmark, play hide and seek and find, but now they don't have to. Another thing that I really like about this is that it doesn't really just stop at Power BI reports. So let's say you have a company SharePoint and you want to embed it into the app and you want to keep it here so that everybody knows where to go to get it. I'm going to go down to sales now, and I'm going to see sales playbook. This is something that is not a report, it's a SharePoint, but even though I can still click it, open it, and it'll actually just keep it open in this navigation window for me. So I don't have to get to a bunch of different links, save a bunch of different things. It just makes it easy to access. And the really cool thing about this is that you can put in Power Apps as well, and it'll just open it right here in that window for people. SharePoint, whatever you want. As long as the end user has access to what you're putting there, then it should open in the content workspace. Personally, I found it a whole lot easier for these reports where you're linking externally to different workspaces to just open it in a new link rather than keep it in the content area. I found some issues keeping it in the content area if the person doesn't have access to the workspace or something like that. It just kind of throws an error. It's not really intuitive, but if it opens in a new tab, the user might be prompted to ask for access or something else. But yeah, that's pretty much how to leverage the Power BI app, use it, get started. Any questions?
Feel free to unmute or type your questions in the chat. Any questions from the group here?
I had
Greg?
a question. We had trouble in the past with tracking usage using apps. Is that still an issue? That it wouldn't count usage against the report? Because we want to try to track, right, if we're having more adoption in Power BI. So that was one reason our organization didn't go the route of apps in the past.
I would think that it would still, I don't know for sure. I thought that it still counted even if you opened it in the app. But I do know for a fact that you can't track utilization for an app itself. But from what I've seen so far, at least on some of the people who've been accessing it through this app, I've been able to notice that even if they're using the app or the link, it's still giving them a credit in the utilization metrics.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you.
We had a question here from Greg.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but this is definitely, I appreciate you bringing this out because this is something I've seen it, but I haven't seen it in action. So this is definitely going to help me explore it when I find some time. It's very cool stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, I kind of.
We have folks here very appreciative of that, Uday. It's good to see that because they're inspired to go look that and try that apps more. So good share.
It's no cost for using the Power App.
Any other questions?
I see one in. I think I see two.
One in the chat.
Can you include a link to a SharePoint list? I believe so. I haven't had the instance of needing to, but most Microsoft resources you should be able to just throw in here. So I would think yes.
Yeah, we have experiences where you can put any link on that navigation that you want anywhere. Yep.
And then, are there any additional costs for using a Power App like this in addition to Power BI costs?
So it's not a Power App. This is part of Power BI. So as
Yep.
long as you have the Power BI license, you should be able to use this.
Did you hear Josh?
Right here, yeah.
Good.
I don't know why they call it apps. Wasn't.
I think they like confusion. Because that's what I was like, really, now I've got apps here, I've got apps in the Microsoft Store, I've got apps on my phone, I got apps in SharePoint. This is not good, guys.
You have flows,
Yeah.
data flows,
Power
flows.
Apps,
Yeah.
it's called Power Apps.
I just know how to make it. I wouldn't name it this if I could. That much
Yep.
I can say.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions or feedback? That was great.
Good work, Udit.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. Let me get this switched back on our side. And I think, do we have any other opportunities for user shares? Anyone want to step up to the plate on short notice and have something to share? Nicole? No? Didn't think so.
Muted.
Oh, she's muted.
I just typed one, but I don't know if the timing's right for it, but I would like to request feedback from the group on this hybrid model and the in-person and so forth and how things are going today.
Yeah, please take a moment, go to the chat if you're in there. Tell us things that went well, what we could work on, what you thought of the hybrid mode, any feedback that helps us plan better for the next one would be great. If you want to unmute right now and share it, feel free.
I'm going to stop the recording, Paul.
Thank you.